At my husband's funeral, my daughter texted, "Sorry, Mom. Today is my boyfriend's birthday." I simply nodded and folded the obituary. 3 weeks later, she opened the letter from my lawyer and fell to her knees in silence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. The morning of Robert's funeral, I woke up at 5 a.m. in our empty house. The silence was deafening. For 28 years, I had woken up to his gentle snoring, the sound of him making coffee, his quiet humming while he shaved. Now there was nothing but the hollow echo of my own breathing in a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. I sat on the edge of our bed staring at his pillow, still indented from where his head had rested just 5 days ago. The funeral home had asked me to bring his best suit. I had chosen the navy blue one he wore to Jessica's college graduation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. She hadn't even bothered to show up on time that day either. She had walked in 30 minutes late, hair still wet from the shower, because she had been out until 3 a.m. at some party. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Jessica, calling to say she was on her way, that she would be there to help me through this impossible day. Maybe she had come to her senses and realized that this was bigger than whatever petty drama was consuming her life this week. Instead, it was a text message. "Sorry, Mom, today is Tyler's birthday, and I promised we'd go to Napa for the weekend. I know Dad would understand. He always said I should live my life. We'll call you later. Love you." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down on Robert's nightstand and stared at the wall where our wedding photo hung. My husband of 28 years was dead, and my only child was choosing her boyfriend's birthday celebration over his funeral, Tyler. The 26-year-old wannabe influencer who had been dating my 30-year-old daughter for 8 months and somehow convinced her that family obligations were toxic and limiting her potential. I should have been shocked. I should have called her, screamed at her, demanded she come home immediately. But instead, I felt something I had never expected to feel about my own daughter, complete and utter indifference. The last piece of my heart that had been reserved for hope simply closed off like a door slamming shut. I got dressed mechanically, putting on the black dress I had bought specifically for this day. It felt strange buying clothes for my husband's funeral, like preparing for the worst day of my life with a shopping trip. Robert had been sick for 6 months, and Jessica had visited exactly twice. The first time she spent 20 minutes complaining about the hospital parking fees. The second time she didn't even come upstairs. She called from the lobby saying Tyler was waiting in the car and she had to go. The funeral home was half empty. Robert's work colleagues came, their faces solemn and respectful. A few neighbors showed up, people who had known us for years. Mrs. Henderson from next door squeezed my hand and whispered, "Where's Jessica, dear? I expected to see her." I smiled and said she couldn't make it. Mrs. Henderson looked confused but didn't press further. What could I say? That my daughter was wine tasting while we buried her father? I sat in the front pew alone. The empty space beside me felt like a canyon, a physical manifestation of everything that was wrong with my family. During the eulogy, I found myself scanning the back of the church every few minutes, hoping against hope that Jessica would walk in late, flustered and apologetic, her hair a mess from rushing. She never did. Father Murphy spoke about Robert's dedication to family, his love for his daughter, his pride in watching her grow into a successful young woman. I almost laughed out loud. If only he knew that Robert's pride was built on carefully constructed lies, that Jessica had spent the last 5 years treating us like an ATM machine with occasional dinner obligations attached. She called when she needed money, when her car broke down, when she wanted us to co-sign something. But she never called just to talk, never visited just because she missed us. After the service, people approached me with their condolences. "He was so proud of Jessica," they said. "She must be absolutely devastated." I nodded and thanked them, playing the role of the grieving mother whose daughter was too overcome with grief to attend. What else could I do? Tell them that she was probably taking Instagram photos with wine glasses while they lowered her father into the ground? The worst part was that Robert had died asking for her. In his final days, delirious from the medication, he kept asking when Jessica was coming to see him. "Is she here yet?" he would whisper. "Tell her I'm waiting." And I would lie and say she was on her way. That traffic was bad, that she would be there soon. He died believing she cared enough to come. When I got home that evening, the house felt enormous and oppressive. My phone had 1 missed call from Jessica. No voicemail, just a call log entry that lasted exactly 12 seconds. She had probably pocket-dialed me while fumbling for her wine glass. I walked through our house, touching things that belonged to Robert. His reading glasses on the kitchen counter, folded exactly the way he always left them. His coffee mug in the sink, still stained with his morning coffee from 5 days ago. His jacket hanging on the back of his chair, the pockets full of receipts and mints, and the small daily debris of a life suddenly cut short. Each item felt like a small stab to my chest, but also like evidence of a life fully lived, at least by him. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had helped Jessica with her homework when she still tolerated our presence, where we had planned our retirement dreams. Robert had wanted to travel. He had maps marked with all the places he wanted to see: Italy, Ireland, the Pacific Northwest. We were going to start next year. He had been researching hotels and restaurants, planning itineraries with the same careful attention he brought to everything. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Jessica. "How did everything go today?" Tyler says hi and sends his condolences. I stared at the message for a long time. How did everything go? Her father was buried today. Her father, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her college education. Her father, who had never missed a single one of her soccer games, even when he was exhausted from working 12-hour days. Her father, who had co-signed her student loans, her car loan, her apartment lease. Her father, who had paid for her spring break trips, and her study abroad semester and her post-graduation finding myself phase. Her father, who had died asking for her, wondering why she hadn't visited him in the hospital. How did everything go? And Tyler says hi. Tyler, who had never met Robert, who had actively discouraged Jessica from visiting, who had convinced her that family guilt was something she needed to overcome. I turned off my phone and went to bed in the empty house. In the empty bed, with the empty space where my life used to be. But something had shifted inside me during those long, quiet hours. Something cold and final. The last thread of hope I had been holding on to for my daughter had snapped completely. And for the first time in years, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The days after the funeral blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I moved through the house like a ghost, handling the endless paperwork that comes with death. Insurance claims, bank accounts, pension transfers. Each form required proof that Robert was gone, as if the empty chair at breakfast wasn't evidence enough. Jessica called exactly once that week, not to ask how I was doing, not to offer help with the arrangements, but to ask about Dad's life insurance situation. She said it casually, like she was asking about the weather. When I told her I was still sorting through everything, she said, "Well, just let me know what I need to sign, okay? Tyler and I are thinking about getting a place together and we might need help with the down payment." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by 30 years of our life together. Photo albums, tax returns, birthday cards Jessica had made in elementary school. In one photo, she's 7 years old, missing her front teeth, hugging Robert after he taught her to ride a bike. She looks at him like he hung the moon. When did that change? When did we become nothing more than a source of funding for her endless string of bad decisions? I opened our joint checking account online and stared at the numbers. The life insurance payout had come through. $300,000. Enough to keep me comfortable for the rest of my life, or enough to bankroll Jessica's continued refusal to grow up. I knew which option she was counting on. The truth was, this pattern had been building for years. I had just been too hopeful, too maternal, too stupid to see it clearly. Jessica hadn't become selfish overnight. She had been training for this moment her entire adult life. It started in college. Every phone call was a crisis that required money. Her laptop died during finals week. Her car needed expensive repairs. Her sorority had mandatory events that required new dresses. Robert and I always said yes. We told ourselves we were investing in her future, helping her focus on her studies instead of worrying about money. But Jessica never seemed to study much. Her grades were mediocre at best, and she changed majors 4 times. After graduation, the requests continued. She needed help with her security deposit. Her roommate stiffed her on utilities. She got fired from her marketing job because her boss was totally unreasonable and expected her to work late sometimes. There was always an excuse, always someone else to blame, always an emergency that required our immediate financial intervention. Robert worried that we were enabling her, but I convinced him we were being good parents. She's finding herself, I would say. Young people take longer to settle down these days. I had a dozen justifications for every handout, every bailout, every time we swooped in to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices. The boyfriends made it worse. First, there was Derek, the aspiring musician who convinced Jessica that working in an office was selling out. She quit her job to support his art, which consisted mainly of playing guitar in coffee shops for tips. When Derek dumped her for someone with a trust fund, she was devastated and broke. We paid her rent for 3 months while she recovered. Then came Marcus, the personal trainer who got her interested in some kind of pyramid scheme selling health supplements. She begged us to invest $5,000 in her business opportunity. Against my better judgment, Robert wrote the check. 6 months later, our garage was full of protein powder that Jessica couldn't sell, and Marcus had moved on to his next victim. Now there was Tyler, the worst of them all, a 26-year-old Instagram influencer with 30,000 followers and no visible means of support. He had convinced Jessica that her family was holding her back and that she needed to establish boundaries with us. Funny how those boundaries only applied to emotional support and time commitment, never to money. I found Robert's journal in his desk drawer. He had been keeping track of our loans to Jessica for the past 5 years. Car payment assistance, $8,400. Rent help, $1,200. Credit card debt, $7,200. Miscellaneous emergencies, $11,300. The total was $30,900, and that didn't include the college tuition we had paid, or the countless smaller amounts we had handed over without thinking twice. She never pays us back, he had written in shaky handwriting just 2 months before he died. Victoria keeps saying she will when she gets on her feet, but when is that going to be? She's 30 years old. When I was 30, I had a mortgage and a baby and 2 jobs. What are we doing wrong? I closed the journal and pressed my face into my hands. Robert had seen it clearly toward the end, but I had been blind. I had made excuses for Jessica's selfishness because the alternative was too painful to accept. I had raised a daughter who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. The really devastating part was remembering how hard Robert had tried to connect with her in those final months. He would light up whenever she called, even though I knew he was just hoping she would ask about him instead of asking for money. He saved articles he thought she would find interesting. He bought books by authors she mentioned liking. He kept a list of restaurants he wanted to take her to when he got better. She never asked about any of it. When she visited him in the hospital, she spent most of the time on her phone, texting Tyler or scrolling through social media. Robert would be lying there, hooked up to machines, trying to tell her about the physical therapy or the new medication, and she would respond with absent-minded uh-huhs while typing. I remember one afternoon when he asked her to help him walk to the window. The doctors had said movement was important for his recovery. Jessica sighed dramatically and said, "Dad, I'm wearing heels. Can't the nurse do that?" She was wearing flip-flops. That night, after she left, Robert cried. I had never seen him cry before, not even when his own father died. "I don't think she loves me," he whispered. "I think she loves what I can give her, but I don't think she loves me." I should have validated his feelings. I should have acknowledged what we both knew to be true. Instead, I made more excuses. "She's just stressed about work," I said. "She doesn't know how to handle seeing you sick. She loves you. She's just not good at expressing it." But Robert was right. Jessica didn't love him. She loved the idea of having parents, the safety net we provided, the financial security of knowing we would always be there to catch her when she fell. But the actual people we were, the individuals with feelings and needs and hopes, we were irrelevant to her. The phone rang, startling me out of my memories. It was Jessica again. "Hey, Mom, I was thinking about Dad's funeral," she said, and for a moment my heart softened. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to acknowledge how badly she had handled everything. "I feel terrible that I missed it," she continued, "but I was thinking we could have a memorial service or something, like a celebration of life. Tyler has some really good ideas about venues, and I know a photographer who could document everything really beautifully. We could invite all of Dad's friends and make it really special." I blinked slowly. She wanted to throw a party, a photographed, documented party where she could play the role of the grieving daughter for social media. "We already had a funeral, Jessica," I said quietly. "I know, but that was so formal and sad. This would be more uplifting, more like Dad would have wanted, and honestly, I think it would help me process my grief better." Her grief that was so overwhelming she had to go wine tasting during her father's burial. "How much would this celebration cost?" I asked. "Oh, not that much. Maybe $5,000 or $6,000. Tyler knows people in event planning, so we could get a good deal." Of course this was about money. Even her fake grief was a business opportunity. "Jessica," I said, "your father is gone. There's not going to be a party." "Mom, don't be so negative. This could be really healing for both of us." "What would be healing," I said, "is if you had shown up when he needed you." There was a long silence. Then Jessica's voice turned cold, the way it always did when she didn't get what she wanted. "I can't change the past," she said. "All I can do is try to move forward and honor Dad's memory. But if you want to just wallow in negativity, that's your choice." She hung up, And sitting there in Robert's study, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well given, I made a choice of my own. Jessica wanted to move forward? Fine. But she was going to do it without me, and without Robert's money. It was time for her to learn what the rest of us had always known. That love isn't a transaction, that family isn't a business arrangement, and that some mistakes have consequences that can't be fixed with an apology or a pretty party. I picked up the phone and called our lawyer. It was time to make some changes. 3 days after that phone call with Jessica, I found myself doing something I had avoided since Robert's death, going through his personal belongings. I had been putting it off, telling myself I wasn't ready, but the truth was, I was afraid of what I might find, afraid of more evidence of how much Jessica's behavior had hurt him. I started with his dresser, folding his shirts and sorting through his socks with mechanical precision. Then I moved to his closet, touching the sleeves of jackets he would never wear again. At the back, behind his winter coats, I found something I had never seen before. A small wooden box, the kind used for jewelry or important documents. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, written in Robert's careful handwriting on his personal letterhead. They were all addressed to Jessica, but the envelopes had never been sealed, never mailed. My hands trembled as I pulled out the first one, dated 6 months before his diagnosis. "My dear Jessica," it began. "I'm writing this because I don't know how to say these things out loud anymore. Every time I try to talk to you about anything meaningful, you seem distracted or annoyed. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know why." I sank into his reading chair and continued reading. Letter after letter, Robert had poured out his heart to a daughter who never knew these words existed. He wrote about his disappointment when she missed family dinners for Tyler's Instagram events. He wrote about his confusion when she asked for money but never asked about his day. He wrote about feeling like he had failed as a father. "I see other men with their adult daughters," one letter read. "They go to lunch together, they call each other just to talk. Their daughters ask for advice about life, not just for bailouts from their mistakes. I wonder what I did wrong that you can't see me as anything more than a bank account." The letters got progressively sadder as his illness progressed. In one, he described lying in the hospital bed, hoping she would visit, planning conversations they could have about books he was reading or shows he was watching. In another, he admitted that he had stopped mentioning her to his friends because he was tired of making excuses for why she never came around. The last letter was dated just 2 weeks before he died. His handwriting was shakier, but the words were clear. "Jessica, I'm running out of time and I need you to know something. I love you more than life itself, but I don't like who you've become. You're selfish and entitled and cruel, and I blame myself for that. Your mother and I gave you everything, but we never taught you gratitude. We solved all your problems, but we never taught you resilience. We handed you money whenever you asked, but we never taught you the value of working for something. I used to think that unconditional love meant supporting you no matter what. Now I realize that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices. I wish I had been brave enough to do that while I still had time to see if it would help you grow up. I'm scared that after I'm gone, you'll treat your mother the same way you've treated us both these past few years. I'm scared that you'll see my death as nothing more than an inheritance opportunity. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. If you're reading this someday, and I'm not here anymore, please know that I died hoping you would change. But I also died knowing that hope isn't enough. Love isn't enough. Some people have to lose everything before they understand what they had. I'm sorry I failed you as a father. I'm sorry I didn't teach you better, and I'm sorry that it took dying for me to finally see clearly. All my love, Dad." I sat in that chair for over an hour, crying until my chest ached. Robert had seen everything. He had understood exactly who Jessica was and exactly what she would do after he was gone. And he had carried that knowledge alone, writing these letters he never sent because he couldn't bear to hurt her with the truth. But there was something else in the box. Tucked under all the letters was a manila folder labeled, "For Victoria." Inside, I found documents I had never seen before. A will amendment, signed and notarized just 1 month before Robert's death, a meeting summary from our lawyer, and a handwritten note in Robert's distinctive script. "Victoria, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably dealing with Jessica's demands for her inheritance. I need you to know that I changed my will. Everything goes to you, not to her. I couldn't bear the thought of our life savings funding more of her selfishness. There's more. I've been researching charities that help elderly people who have been abandoned by their families. I found one called Silver Haven that provides housing and support for seniors whose children don't care for them. I want you to consider donating our money there instead of giving it to Jessica. Let our savings help people who actually need it. People whose families failed them the way we failed Jessica by enabling her for so long. I know this will be hard. I know you love her. But loving someone doesn't mean funding their refusal to grow up. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them fall. I'm sorry to put this burden on you. I should have been stronger while I was alive, but I trust you to do what's right. Robert. My hands shook as I read the letter again. Robert hadn't just seen Jessica clearly. He had taken action. He had protected our assets from her entitlement and given me a roadmap for what to do next. More than that, he had given me permission to stop enabling her. Something I had never been able to give myself. I looked up Silver Haven online. It was exactly what Robert had described, a residential community for older adults whose families had abandoned them. The website showed smiling faces of people who had found companionship and dignity in their golden years, despite being rejected by their own children. The testimonials broke my heart and filled me with purpose at the same time. I thought I would die alone, wrote one resident. My son only called when he needed money, but here I have people who care about me as a person, not what I can give them. My daughter told me I was too negative and she couldn't have that energy in her life, wrote another. But the truth was, I was depressed because she never visited. Here, I have friends who actually want to spend time with me. These were my people. These were Robert's people, adults who had given everything to their children, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. We could help them. Our money could give them comfort and community and the love their families had withheld. I called the lawyer that afternoon and made an appointment for the next day. When I told him what I wanted to do, he was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Chen, he said finally, are you sure about this? It's a significant sum of money. Have you discussed this with your daughter? My daughter made her priorities clear when she chose a birthday party over her father's funeral, I said. She'll survive without an inheritance. These people at Silver Haven might not survive without help. He nodded and pulled out the paperwork. Your husband was very specific about his wishes. He really wanted you to have full control over the estate. He knew what Jessica would do, I said. He knew she would see his death as a payday. He was protecting both of us. As I signed the papers that would redirect our life savings to Silver Haven, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. This felt right. This felt like something Robert would be proud of. Instead of funding Jessica's continued irresponsibility, our money would help people who deserved compassion, people who understood the value of family because they had lost it through no fault of their own. The lawyer handed me copies of all the documents. So, just to be clear, he said, your daughter will receive nothing from the estate? She'll receive exactly what she gave her father in his final months, I said. Nothing. I drove home feeling lighter than I had since Robert's death. Jessica would be furious when she found out, but her anger couldn't touch me anymore. I had found a way to honor Robert's memory that would actually matter, that would actually help people instead of enabling selfishness. That evening, I called Silver Haven and spoke to the director about making a major donation. She cried when I told her the amount, and I cried when she told me how many residents they could help with Robert's gift. Would you like to visit? She asked. We'd love to show you what your husband's generosity will make possible. I made an appointment for the following week. For the first time since Robert's death, I had somewhere to go, something to look forward to. I had a purpose beyond managing my grief and dealing with Jessica's demands. I was finally ready to build a life that Robert would be proud of, a life that honored his values instead of funding the destruction of them. And Jessica would just have to figure out how to be an adult without our safety net. Maybe she would surprise me. Maybe losing her inheritance would finally teach her what all our enabling never could. But even if it didn't, at least I would know that Robert's legacy was helping people who truly deserved it. People who understood that love isn't measured in dollars, and that family is something you earn, not something you inherit. My visit to Silver Haven the following week changed everything. I had expected to feel sad, seeing all these elderly people whose families had abandoned them. Instead, I found myself in a place filled with laughter, purpose, and genuine human connection. Margaret, the director, walked me through the facility with obvious pride. The main building looked more like a luxury hotel than a nursing home, with comfortable seating areas, a library, an art studio, and a dining room where residents gathered around large tables, chatting over meals like old friends. Most of our residents come to us after being neglected or financially exploited by their own children, Margaret explained as we passed a group playing cards. They arrive broken-hearted and feeling worthless, but they leave here knowing they have value, that they matter to people who choose to care about them. She introduced me to Dorothy, an 80-year-old former teacher whose son had stolen her retirement savings to fund his gambling addiction. He told me I was being dramatic when I said I couldn't afford my medication, Dorothy said with a wry smile. Said I should just trust him to handle my finances. Took me 2 years to realize he was handling them right into his own pocket. Then there was Frank, a retired electrician whose daughter had convinced him to sign over his house to her, promising to let him live there until he died. She moved me into the basement and rented out my bedroom to strangers, he told me. Said I should be grateful she was helping me earn income. When I complained about the noise, she threatened to put me in the worst nursing home she could find. Story after story, each one a variation on the same theme. Children who saw their aging parents as burdens to be managed or resources to be exploited. But here at Silver Haven, these people had found something their families had never given them: unconditional acceptance and genuine care. The hardest part isn't the money, explained Helen, a petite woman who had been a nurse for 40 years before her son cleaned out her bank account. It's realizing that the person you loved most in the world sees you as nothing more than a problem to be solved or a wallet to be emptied. But here, people care about who I am, not what I can give them. As Margaret showed me the memory care unit, she mentioned their biggest need: funding for residents whose families had left them with nothing. We never turn anyone away, she said, but we rely on donations to care for people whose children have abandoned them financially as well as emotionally. That's when I knew Robert had been right. This was where our money belonged, not funding Jessica's latest whim or Tyler's influence career, but helping people who truly needed and deserved support. I'd like to establish a permanent endowment, I told Margaret, in my husband's name. Something that will help people like Dorothy and Frank and Helen for years to come. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? It's such a generous gift. My husband would have loved this place, I said. He would have wanted to help. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Silver Haven's development team to structure the Robert Chen Memorial Endowment. The fund would provide housing, healthcare, and activities for residents whose families had failed them. It would be Robert's legacy, something meaningful and lasting that honored his values. Meanwhile, Jessica continued calling about estate planning. She had started dropping by the house unannounced, ostensibly to check on me, but really to assess what she would be inheriting. I watched her walk through rooms with calculating eyes, probably mentally cataloging furniture and artwork. You know, Mom, she said during one visit, this house is way too big for just you. Have you thought about downsizing? Tyler and I could help you find something smaller, more manageable. I knew exactly what she was thinking. Sell the house, split the proceeds, let her take her share and run. It was the same approach she had taken to everything else in her life. Get what you can as quickly as possible, then move on to the next opportunity. I'm not ready to make any big decisions yet, I told her. I'm still processing everything. I get that, she said, but I could see the impatience in her eyes. But maybe it would be good to start thinking about the future. Dad wouldn't want you to be stuck in the past. The irony was staggering. Jessica, who had refused to visit her dying father, was now invoking his wishes to pressure me into giving her money. But I just nodded and changed the subject. The hardest part was watching her pretend to grieve. She had started posting photos on social media with captions like "missing my dad every day" and "still processing this huge loss." She shared memories that were obviously fabricated or exaggerated, painting herself as a devoted daughter who was struggling with overwhelming sorrow. Tyler even created a hashtag, Grief Journey. They posted pictures of themselves at restaurants with captions about how Dad would have loved this place, and at parks with messages about feeling his presence in nature. It was a performance, a calculated attempt to rehabilitate Jessica's image before claiming her inheritance. The most nauseating post was a photo of Jessica holding one of Robert's old books, with a caption that read, "Found this in Dad's study today. He wrote so many notes in the margins. I can hear his voice in every word. Some days the grief feels impossible, but I know he's watching over me." Robert had indeed written in that book, but Jessica had never shown any interest in his reading habits when he was alive. She probably hadn't even read the caption she had Tyler write for her. 3 weeks after my visit to Silver Haven, I got the call I had been expecting. "Mrs. Chen? This is Brian Walsh from Peterson, Walsh & Associates. I'm calling about the Robert Chen Memorial Endowment. All the paperwork has been finalized, and the funds have been transferred to Silver Haven. I wanted to confirm that you're ready to proceed with notifying your daughter about the estate distribution." "Yes," I said. "Send the letter." "And you're certain about this decision? Once she receives notification, there's no taking it back." I thought about Robert's letters, about his final wishes, about Dorothy and Frank and Helen and all the other people whose families had failed them. I thought about Jessica choosing Tyler's birthday over her father's funeral, about her calculating eyes as she walked through our house, about her fake grief posts on social media. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I said. The lawyer mailed the letter that afternoon. Jessica would receive it the next day, and then this charade would finally be over. She would learn that her father had seen through her selfishness, that her inheritance was going to people who actually deserved help, and that her mother was no longer willing to enable her entitled behavior. I spent that evening at Silver Haven, having dinner with the residents and listening to their stories. Dorothy showed me photos from her teaching career. Frank told me about the houses he had wired in the early days of his business. Helen shared memories of the patients she had cared for during 40 years of nursing. These were people with rich histories, valuable experiences, and wisdom gained through decades of hard work and service to others. Their children had discarded them like trash, but here they were valued and respected and loved. Your husband's gift will help so many people, Margaret told me as I prepared to leave. We're going to put a plaque in the garden with his name on it. Would you like to help choose the inscription? He would have liked something simple, I said. Maybe just Robert Chen. He believed in the power of genuine love. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Excitement about the future. Tomorrow, Jessica would learn that her entitled expectations were just fantasies. Tomorrow, she would discover that actions have consequences, that love can't be taken for granted, and that some disappointments are too deep to be fixed with money. I had spent 30 years trying to buy Jessica's love and respect. Now I was finally free to spend Robert's legacy on people who would actually appreciate it, people who understood that family isn't about what you can get, but about what you're willing to give. The letter would arrive tomorrow and Jessica's world would change forever. But for the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't dreading the fallout. I was looking forward to building something beautiful from the ashes of our broken relationship. Something that would honor Robert's memory and help people who truly deserved compassion. The old Victoria would have worried about Jessica's reaction, would have already started planning apologies and explanations. But the new Victoria, the one Robert's letters had helped me become, was ready to let Jessica face the consequences of her choices. It was long overdue. The call came at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my garden, tending to Robert's roses, when my phone rang with Jessica's number. I had been expecting this call since the lawyer confirmed he had sent the letter yesterday. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Mom. Her voice was different, flat, shocked. I got a letter from Dad's lawyer. Did you? I kept my voice neutral as I deadheaded a particularly beautiful bloom. It says, she paused, and I could hear papers rustling. It says that Dad left everything to you, that there's no inheritance for me at all. This has to be a mistake. It's not a mistake, Jessica. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, what do you mean it's not a mistake? Of course it's a mistake. Dad wouldn't do this to me. I sat down on Robert's favorite bench, the one he had built himself 15 years ago. Your father was very clear about his wishes. Everything comes to me, and I'm free to do with it what I think best. But that's insane! Her voice cracked with panic. I'm his daughter. I'm his only child. You can't just cut me out of his will. I didn't cut you out, Jessica. Your father did. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, uncertain. Why would he do that? I don't understand. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She genuinely seemed shocked that her behavior had consequences. But then I remembered Robert lying in that hospital bed, asking when she was coming to visit. I remembered him dying while she was posting Instagram stories from wine country. When was the last time you visited your father without asking for money? I asked. That's not fair. I loved Dad. When was the last time you called him just to see how he was doing? Mom, stop. This isn't about, when was the last time you remembered his birthday without me reminding you? You're being cruel, she said, but her voice was shaking. I'm being honest, something I should have done years ago. I heard Tyler's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. He was asking what was happening, what the lawyer had said. Jessica covered the phone, but I could still hear their muffled argument. When she came back on, her tone had hardened. Fine. You want to play games? I'll contest the will. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The medication, the pain pills, they probably affected his judgment. Any lawyer will tell you that. Your father changed his will a month before he got sick, I said calmly. When he was completely healthy and clear-minded, he knew exactly what he was doing. Another pause. Then you influenced him. You turned him against me. I almost laughed. Jessica, I spent 5 years making excuses for you to your father. I defended you when you missed family dinners. I covered for you when you forgot his birthday. I lied to him about why you never visited when he was sick. If anything, I protected you from seeing how disappointed he really was. That's not true. He wrote letters, Jessica. Letters he never sent because he couldn't bear to hurt you with the truth. He knew exactly who you had become, and he made his decision accordingly. I could hear her crying now, but it sounded more like frustration than grief. Tyler was talking urgently in the background, and I caught fragments. Lawsuit, undue influence. We can fight this. Where is the money going? Jessica asked suddenly. If I'm not getting it, what are you doing with it? I'm donating it to Silver Haven. It's a residential community for elderly people whose families have abandoned them. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. There was a sharp intake of breath, then more muffled conversation with Tyler. You can't do this, she said when she came back. That money belongs to our family. No, Jessica, that money belonged to your father, and now it belongs to me, and I'm giving it to people who actually need it. People whose children failed them the same way you failed your father. I didn't fail anyone, she shouted. I was living my life. Dad always said I should be independent. There's a difference between independence and abandonment. You chose your boyfriend's birthday party over your father's funeral. You chose Instagram photos over hospital visits. You chose asking for money over asking how he was feeling. Those were your choices, and this is the consequence. Tyler grabbed the phone. Mrs. Chen, this is Tyler. Jessica is very upset right now, and I think you're being incredibly manipulative and cruel. Mr. Chen obviously wasn't thinking clearly when he made these decisions. Tyler, I said, my voice ice cold, you convinced my daughter to skip her father's funeral for your birthday party. You have no business discussing what my husband was or wasn't thinking clearly about. That's not what happened. Jessica was conflicted, and I supported whatever decision she made. You supported her decision to abandon her dying father. That tells me everything I need to know about you. I hung up before he could respond. The phone rang again immediately. I declined the call. It rang again. I turned it off. An hour later, Jessica was at my front door. I could see her through the window, pacing on the porch, gesticulating wildly as she talked to Tyler on her phone. She was clearly distraught, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I went to Robert's study and pulled out his letters. I selected 3 of them, the ones where he wrote most clearly about his disappointment in Jessica's behavior, and made copies. When the doorbell finally stopped ringing, I went back to the window. Jessica was gone, but I knew this wasn't over. Tyler would probably convince her to hire a lawyer, to fight the will, to make this as difficult as possible. Let them try. Robert had been very careful about the legal aspects, and I had some of the best lawyers in the city on my side. That evening, Margaret from Silver Haven called with an update on the endowment. Victoria, I wanted to let you know that we've already identified 5 residents who will be directly helped by Robert's gift. There's also a woman on our waiting list whose son took her savings to buy a boat. She's been living in her car for 3 weeks, but now we can offer her a place immediately. Robert would be so happy to know that, I said, and meant it. Would you like to meet her when she arrives? Her name is Patricia, and she was a librarian for 35 years. I think you two would have a lot in common. I'd love that. After I hung up, I walked through the house that Robert and I had shared for so many years. It felt different now. Lighter somehow. The weight of Jessica's expectations, of her constant financial demands, of her emotional manipulation, all of that was finally gone. Tomorrow, she would probably show up again with a lawyer. She would make threats and accusations. She would try to paint me as a vindictive mother who had stolen her rightful inheritance. But it wouldn't matter. I had documentation, legal backing, and most importantly, I had the truth. Robert had seen Jessica clearly in his final months, and he had made his choice. Our money would help people who truly needed it, people who understood the value of family because they had lost it through no fault of their own. I poured myself a glass of the wine Robert and I had been saving for our retirement travels, and I toasted his photograph on the mantel. You were right, I told him. Love isn't a transaction, and some people have to lose everything before they understand what they had. The old Victoria would have been lying awake tonight, worrying about Jessica's feelings, planning ways to smooth things over. But this Victoria, the one Robert's letters had helped me become, slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. I was finally free to build a life that honored Robert's values instead of enabling Jessica's selfishness. And somewhere across town, Jessica was probably just beginning to understand that actions have consequences, that love can't be taken for granted, and that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. 6 months later, I stood in the garden at Silver Haven, watching residents tend to vegetables they had planted with their own hands. The Robert Chen Memorial Garden was thriving, just like the people it served. Tomatoes climbed wooden trellises, herbs perfumed the air, and elderly hands that had once felt useless now had purpose again. Patricia, the former librarian whose son had stolen her savings for a boat, walked up beside me carrying a basket of fresh lettuce. She had arrived 3 weeks after my confrontation with Jessica, frightened and broken after living in her car. Now she managed Silverhaven's new library and had become one of my closest friends. "The basil is ready for harvesting," she said with a smile. "Dorothy wants to make pesto for tonight's dinner. She says it was her late husband's favorite recipe." "Robert would have loved seeing this," I said, watching Frank show a newer resident how to properly stake tomato plants. "He always said the best investments were the ones that kept growing long after you made them." Jessica had tried to contest the will, just as I had expected. She hired an expensive lawyer, claiming emotional distress and undue influence. Tyler had convinced her they could prove Robert wasn't competent when he changed his will. They lasted exactly 6 weeks before their attorney advised them to drop the case. "Your father was very thorough," the lawyer had told them, according to Margaret, who had somehow heard the story from a friend of a friend. "He had medical records proving his mental clarity, witness statements, and a paper trail showing he had been planning this for months. You have no case." The legal fees had apparently cleaned out Jessica's savings. Tyler, faced with the reality that there would be no inheritance windfall, had promptly moved on to dating someone whose parents were still alive and wealthy. Jessica was alone now, truly alone, probably for the first time in her adult life. She had called me exactly once since the lawsuit failed. It was my birthday, 2 months ago, and for a moment I thought she might be calling to apologize, to try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Instead, she had asked if I would consider giving her just a small loan to help her get back on her feet after Tyler left. When I declined, she accused me of being heartless and vindictive. She said I was destroying our family out of spite, that I was letting my grief make me cruel. "There is no family to destroy," I had told her quietly. "You made that clear when you chose a birthday party over your father's funeral." She hung up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. At first, I worried that I would regret my decision. I had spent 30 years putting Jessica's needs before my own, and the silence felt strange. But as weeks turned to months, I discovered something unexpected: peace. Deep, genuine peace that I hadn't felt in years. I had built a new life at Silverhaven. I volunteered 3 days a week, helping with activities and just spending time with residents who understood what it meant to be discarded by people who should love you. I had dinner with Frank and Dorothy and Helen and Patricia several times a week, sharing stories and laughter with people who appreciated my company for its own sake. Margaret had offered me a position on the board of directors, and I had accepted. We were expanding the program to include a day center for seniors whose families neglected them, but hadn't completely abandoned them yet. The goal was intervention, helping families learn to value their elderly members before it was too late. "Sometimes I think about reaching out to my daughter," Patricia told me as we walked back toward the main building. "I wonder if she even knows I'm not living in my car anymore." But then I remember how she looked at me when I told her about the money being gone, like I was already dead. "The hardest lesson I learned," I said, "is that you can't love someone into being a good person. Love doesn't fix character flaws. It just enables them if you're not careful." We paused at the memorial plaque Margaret had installed near the entrance to the garden. Robert Chen. He believed in the power of genuine love. Below it, in smaller text, "His legacy lives on in the lives he continues to touch." Every time I read those words, I felt Robert's presence. Not in some mystical way, but in the tangible reality of what his money was accomplishing. Mrs. Anderson, who had been financially abused by her grandson, now had a safe place to live. Mr. Rodriguez, whose children had put him in a terrible facility and forgotten about him, was learning to paint watercolors. Susan Wright, whose daughter had convinced her to sign over her house and then kicked her out, was teaching other residents how to knit. These were Robert's true legacy. Not Jessica's Instagram posts or Tyler's influence career, but real people living better lives because a good man had recognized that love should be given to those who value it. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Victoria, Patricia's book club wants to know if you can join them next Thursday. They're reading that mystery novel you recommended." I smiled as I typed back my acceptance. This was my family now. Not the family I had been born into or the family I had raised, but the family I had chosen. People who cared about each other not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The autumn air was crisp as I walked to my car, and I realized I was humming. Actually humming. Something I hadn't done since Robert died. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy for the first time in months. As I drove past the park where Robert and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, I saw a young woman pushing an elderly man in a wheelchair. She was laughing at something he had said, her face bright with genuine affection. They looked like they enjoyed each other's company, like spending time together was a pleasure rather than an obligation. That could have been Jessica and Robert. Should have been Jessica and Robert. But Jessica had made different choices, and now she was living with the consequences while I was living with the peace that comes from finally doing the right thing. I drove home to the house that no longer felt too big or too empty. I had dinner plans with Patricia and Dorothy, a board meeting to prepare for, and a new resident arriving tomorrow who needed someone to help her navigate her first day away from the family that had failed her. My calendar was full, but not with obligations I dreaded. Full with people I genuinely cared about and activities that gave my life meaning. Full with the kind of relationships Robert had always believed in, based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than guilt and financial dependence. That night, I sat in Robert's chair in his study, surrounded by the books he had loved and the notes he had written. I pulled out one of his unmailed letters, the one where he wrote about hoping I would find happiness after he was gone. I found it, I whispered to his photograph. I found exactly the kind of happiness you would have wanted for me. Outside, the wind chimed softly through the trees we had planted together 20 years ago. Inside, the house settled into comfortable silence, and somewhere across town, Jessica was probably posting another fake grief Instagram story, or plotting another way to get money from relatives, or blaming everyone but herself for the mess her life had become. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices, even when that someone is your own child. Robert's legacy was safe now, helping people who truly deserved help, and I was finally free to live the kind of life he would have been proud of, surrounded by genuine love, genuine friends, and genuine purpose. The girl who had once chosen a birthday party over her father's funeral would have to find her own way forward. I had found mine.